we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means, on infiltration instead of invasion, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. There is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it.
All right, welcome to episode 73 of the Abuse Hour. It is I, your host, Coffee Long, coming to you unsupervised, unmedicated, and an unchecked threat to society. Coming to you undead today from my secret underground lair. And I know I've been gone for a while, and as you could probably tell by how I sound, I'm damn near dead, man. I was sick for like a week. It's ridiculous, dude. One, no, I did not get my vax. But two, I don't know what the hell I got going, man, but it took a while. And I'm just about back to normal now, but I was hating life for a little bit. So anyway, in light of an upcoming event, I wanted to put out like a little bit of an evergreen product. So there's plenty of new stuff going on out there. There's a lot to talk about. But I'm not going to talk about any of that because the 111th, I think it is, anniversary of Mary Fagan's murder is nigh upon us, coming up on April 26th. So out of all of the episodes that I did from the before time, I think the Leo Frank deal was probably the one that I actually put the most time and effort into, and it was probably, I think, one of the best products that I had put out, especially from a prep standpoint, because, you know, usually my prep is like look at some shit news site for like 10 minutes and then rant about something that's not even remotely related to what we were talking about. But this thing is highly relevant and highly informative, I think, because it goes a long way into explaining a little bit about some of the people that are out there and just how well organized they are and the nature of the people that are trying to essentially eradicate you. It talks a whole lot about what these people have done to our society, what they're willing to do to you, and just how coordinated they are. So I want to get into this thing. So the way I want to do this is I want to give like an overview, and then I want to go back through the timeline. And man, you listen to this, I'm going to apologize up front because it is going to feel in some spots like I'm bouncing around, but there is, like the Lebowski says, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. So there's a lot to work through, and there's a lot of, I want to say, nuance. And I think part of what makes this cool is that you can look back at this and you read back through this, and dude, read back through it. I did. Like, I read a lot about it the first time I talked about it, but then listening to it, I noticed that there was some stuff that I had overlooked. But now going back through it again, man, I was sick and I didn't have anything else to do. So I actually read through the entire court transcript, and then I listened to an audiobook, and then I read some of the newspaper articles and looked at some of the sketches and the whole deal. I mean, it's easier now to be convinced more than ever that this guy was guilty as sin, this Leo Frank. This fucker did it. I want to go back through then and talk through the timeline, talk through some of the nuances, and then talk through some of the anomalies, some of the things that really stick out, that knowing what we know now about the people we're dealing with here, knowing what we know now, there are a whole lot of things that really, really stood out that you'd just be less inclined to notice in, 1913. And then at the end, I want to give you like my view of what probably happened, based on our perspective of the way that we know all of these people conduct themselves. And then lastly, I'm going to save the cherry on top for last, for when this fucking guy got when this guy got snatched up and strung up and justice was as close to as it could be to being served. So by means of an overview then, I will imagine you will have at least heard something about this case. Man, I got like 10 pages of notes here, but I will imagine you have at some point heard at least something about this case if you're peripheral to our thing at all. But the long and short here is that Mary Fagan was a 13-year-old girl who worked at the National Pencil Factory in 1913. So on 26th April 1913, she left her home in Atlanta, traveled about 15 minutes by streetcar to the factory on a Saturday to get her paycheck, which at the time was about $2.50, if I remember correctly. She went there to get her paycheck, according to the documents. We have the documents, but According to the documents, she got there, did get her paycheck, but was then never seen again. And by every piece of evidence, appears to have never left that pencil factory once she showed up. She was found, her body was found at about 3 a.m. by the night watchman. So during the course of this investigation and subsequent trial, there were various attempts to push blame first onto the night watchman and second onto a sweeper, a guy who just swept up at this factory, a guy named Jim Conley, and he's really the kind of the key piece here, really the monkey's paw, the golem that undoes the entire caper, but we'll get to him in due course. So as this thing unfolded, there was looks initially at this night watchman, there was looks at some other people on whom suspicion fell, and then almost as soon as this investigation really kicked off good and proper, the superintendent, the overseer, if you will, of this factory, Leo Frank, a Hebrew originally from, I could say for all intents and purposes, originally from Brooklyn, New York, became the object of suspicion, and not without good reason. As this thing wrapped up, suspicion more and more fell away from the night watchman, a black dude, and from this sweeper, this Jim Conley, also a black dude. These guys were essentially cut out of this thing. Jim Conley did end up getting a year for his role in what happened, but we'll get to this in due course. So talking through the timeline of this Mary Fagan murder, I want to get into the timeline here. And what I'm trying to do, what I have tried to do through my notes here, is pretty much everything I've mentioned initially in these notes. I tried to make these things that there's pretty much no question that this thing happened, that this happened at this time, that these people were where they claim to be at I'm trying to give you the facts, just the straight facts first. We'll move through the timeline, and some of the details that I'll hit on, I won't just say it for, to create the landscape, I guess. I want to explain this thing so that it's like we will be referring back to a lot of this stuff as we move along. Kicking this off then, the National Pencil Factory. This place is in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is a 3-story structure. And it's just like you might imagine. It's like a shoebox-shaped building. And I looked at all the sketches. Like I really went down the rabbit hole. Looked at the sketches, got the whole picture of this. But it's like a big shoebox-shaped structure where you enter at one of the small ends of the shoebox, if you will. You'll enter on the first floor, and then as you come through the door immediately, there's stairs going up. Now, to each side of these stairs, there's various boxes and just stuff, like little spots and around the corner type shit, like where the elevator shaft is and so on. And in this spot, this is where, this is going to come into play later, where this guy Connolly was able to observe people entering and exiting, but they didn't always so much see him. But so you would enter on the first floor at one end of this shoebox. You would immediately go upstairs, and on the second floor then, this is where the offices are as you come up the stairs, like the administrative offices. This is where Leo Frank's office was. We'll get to why that matters in a minute. As you come out of those offices, if you keep proceeding towards the far end of that shoebox, that structure, you'll go through a set of double doors, and then back there, that's where I want to say like the finishing end of this work happens. So this is where a lot of young girls work. They work back there putting, I guess, like the eraser onto the pencil, wrapping the pencils up with this twine that was like pre-staged, and then getting them ready to, in whatever way they get them ready to send out the door. If you go downstairs now from that first floor there, I don't know what else is on that first floor. It looked like storage from the way the sketch looked, but it's kind of hard to say. I don't know if it's storage or if there's a way that like the trucks come in there and they drop the stuff down through the building somehow and it gets onto the trucks. I don't know, but it didn't really clarify what else is on the first floor. But now below that is a basement. And the way this appears to have function was like both as a storage area and then as a place to just dump trash and get rid of stuff. And then there's a furnace down there and so on. So this basement, this is where Mary Fagan's body was finally left, towards the far end of that basement. So moving through the timeline here, So I wanted you to have like an idea of what we're talking about here, because when I talk about like the guy came up the stairs, the guy went to the elevator shaft, so on, I want you to have kind of a visual idea of what we're talking about here. So kind of the way this timeline played out. 26 April, Mary Fagan departs her home at approximately 11:45 to go and pick up her pay. Now, typically what they had done at this factory, according to Leo Frank's testimony and everybody else, was the girls, and I don't know if everybody else as well, but the girls who worked in this factory got paid on Saturday at about noon. That was go get paid time, and everybody apparently lived like right nearby. There was a holiday that day. It was Confederate Memorial Day. So to accommodate this holiday, Frank says, hey, everybody come Friday and get paid instead, and tomorrow is going to be a holiday. So on that Friday, when everybody else was getting paid, a girl named Helen Ferguson went to Frank's office. Now, this is Friday the 25th. Went to Frank's office to try to pick up the paycheck for Mary Fagan. Now, like to us, this would sound wonky, like, no, dude, I'm not giving pay to somebody else. But apparently this was a fairly normal practice. There were several other girls that testified that, like, yes, I have gone and picked up paychecks for my friend, or in one case, I think it was like a sister or a cousin or some such. But this was not an unheard of practice. In this instance, though, Helen Ferguson showed up on Friday, asked if she could pick up the check for Mary Fagan, and it will become clearer as to why as we move along. Frank said no, she has to come and get it herself. So on 11:45 on Saturday the 26th, Mary Fagan left her home after her bread and cabbage lunch, took the streetcar, met a kid on the streetcar named George Epps, who apparently she was friends with. George Epps testified that he did see her on that streetcar, and they had plans to meet up later at the Confederate parade and then afterwards to go to a ball game that started at about 4 o'clock. So both he and the streetcar driver, who were like, all these people were detained. So when it says, if you read through this stuff, it'll say things like the night watchman was arrested and let go, or this guy, Jim Conley, was arrested and let go. A streetcar driver was arrested and let go. Everybody got arrested. Like, this was way before you had all of this civil rights shit where you could have a lawyer down there and have you out in an hour. They're like, no, dude, something happened. Somebody got killed. You're under arrest until we figure out if you were involved, and then we'll cut your ass loose. So to say that somebody was arrested is like, yeah, if you were anywhere near this murder victim, you're going to get rolled up. So all of these people had been at some point detained and then turned loose. But according to all the documents and testimony, we can assume that Mary Fagan arrived at the National Pencil Factory at about noon, went upstairs, and again, according to Leo Frank's ledger, took her pay of $2 and something, and after that was not seen again. So this is kind of where the mystery commences. And it's during this time frame that over the course of the next hour or so that we'll hear about different people coming and going, and this is the time when Mary Fagan is murdered and her body is deposited in the basement. So during this timeline, shortly after this, Leo Frank departs the factory, goes home for lunch. He returns about 3 o'clock. Shortly after that, at 4 o'clock, the night watchman, Newt Lee, the first kind of key character in this story, shows up for work. So this was a Saturday, and on Saturdays, usually Newt Lee, the night watchman, shows up at 5 o'clock. In this instance, however, Leo Frank asked him the day before on Friday, said, hey, I need you to show up here at 4 o'clock because I'm going to be leaving a little bit early. He says, okay, boss, I'll show up at 4 o'clock. So I don't know where Newt Lee lived, but I'm going to guess that this guy wasn't made of money to just go gallivanting around the countryside. Anyway, he shows up at 4 o'clock. According to his testimony, when he showed up, Mr. Frank was sweaty, nervous, and rubbing his hands. And he says, Newt, what are you doing here? And he says, well, Mr. Frank, you asked me yesterday to show up early, so here I am. And he says, oh, well, you know what? I don't actually need you this early. And you know what? You work really hard, so I'd like you to take a little time to yourself. Go out and according to the testimony here, go out and have a good time and then come back in an hour and a half. So he's talking about come back between 5:30 and 6. And As to whether he actually handed him money or not, it's unclear. I think there are some things that got stricken out of the record and wasn't included. I remember seeing in a few places that he did hand him money. I'm not surprised to see if Newt Lee says, no, he didn't give me any money. Whether he gave him money or not, it's kind of here or there. But either way, he does say, hey, get the fuck out of here. I don't want you here. Get out of here. Come back. 5:36. I got some shit I got to do. So Newt Lee says he takes off. I think he said he went and got a soda or some kind of thing. It's very possible he just went across the street and got a beer because there apparently was a bar across the street. But he goes somewhere. He pisses off for an hour and change and then comes back. So he comes back, and as he's coming back, the day watch guy is getting ready to leave. And now this other fella named John Gant shows up at about the same time. So he shows up. As he shows up, he comes through the front door of the, one end of the shoebox, if you will. And again, at the top of the stairs or coming down the stairs, here again is Mr. Frank. And he doesn't say exactly what he's doing, but now here comes this guy, John Gant, and he's saying that he wants to come in and he wants to go and pick up some shoes that he had left behind the day before. This is kind of important because John Gant had gotten fired the day before over a question of whether or not the books were straight. So John Gant was a timekeeper and helped out with the books apparently, and they were like $2 short. So Leo Frank says, hey, we're $2 short, and John Gant says, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't take it. And Frank says, well, I'm not going to make it right. So he's going to be a big dick over this $2. And Gant says, well, you're not taking it out of my pay. So he says, all right, well, you're fired. So he jogs him on. So now this day, this guy Gant shows up and he says, hey, I left a couple pairs of shoes here. I want to go and pick them up. And Frank says, well, I think I saw one of the boys sweeping up, and I think they swept him up and just got rid of him. And this guy Gant says, oh yeah, what color were they? And he goes, they were tan. And he says, okay, well, I had a set of tan ones and I also had a set of black ones. So if it's all right with you, sir, I'd like to go and pick up my stuff that I left up there. So he looks at Newt Lee, the night watchman, and says, go ahead and escort him straight there to get his stuff and then escort him right back out of here. He says, okay, boss, no big deal. This guy apparently goes and does his thing and takes off. Now, at this time, I think it's important as well to sort of keep track of what kind of people we're dealing with here. So as everybody's kind of, coming and going, and like the people from the daytime are getting ready to take off, at this point, Newt Lee sees this guy Darley, who is kind of the other guy at the head of the snake, if you will. So where Leo Frank was kind of in charge of the bookkeeping and probably the orders and order fulfillment and, getting materials delivered, whatever, this guy Darley, appears to have been more in charge of manpower and operations. So as Newt Lee is coming on, this guy Darley is walking out this girl, a young girl, I think her name is Hattie Lee, if I remember right. Or maybe it's Hattie Smith. Hattie something. I just remember it was a weird name like that. Hattie. And he's walking out young Hattie, who appears to be crying. And apparently, this girl had come in there the day before to get paid on Friday as requested. But when she got home, she noticed that she had been paid $3 too much. So now, mind you, these girls are getting paid like $2, $3 at a shot. So this girl got like double her pay. Big fucking deal. It's $2 to $3. But she actually came back to give this money back. So she came back and gave this $3 back. And as Mr. Darley is walking her out, Newt Lee sees that she's crying, and he hears Mr. Darley talking about the fact that I guess her father, this girl's father, was sick. And this fucking guy is like, yeah, well, let us know and maybe we can help you get a deal on burial expenses. I shit you not. This is the caliber of motherfuckers you're dealing with here. So to kind of draw a distinction, this guy Leo Frank, it discussed a little bit about his pay. So when you look at just a Wikipedia article, it's talking about like $180 a month. But it also goes on to specify that he did get a little cut of, some of the profits from the factory. When you read through the court documents, they're talking about his pay comes out to, his total compensation, if you will, about $150 a week. So running that through an inflation calculator, $150 a week in 1913 comes out to about $246,000 a year. This motherfucker is shitting in tall cotton. All right. And now this guy, Darley, if he's up there at the head of the snake with him, I'm going to guess that he's making at least half that much. And now you got some teenage girl in your employ whose father is dying, and you're like, oh, wow, that's too fucking bad. Hey, let me know if, when he does die, maybe I cut you a deal on burial expenses or some shit. But until then, give me back that $3. Like, what kind of fucking people are these anyway? Anyway, so apparently then, Leo Frank takes off finally at 6 o'clock at night. And again, we're going to get to some of the details as we move along. I just want to hit the stuff that's like the no-shitter that we know for sure. So Newt Lee now, he's hanging out there, and his job is to make rounds. And Leo Frank has finally taken off at 6 o'clock. And Newt Lee is there presumably by himself. But his job is to go through every floor, and apparently there are different places on the different floors where he's supposed to punch a clock to demonstrate that he has in fact been there. So the way this downstairs, this basement situation worked then, apparently there's a back door to it, which is at the opposite end of the shoebox, if you will. So there's a door at the back end there. And as I'm understanding it, it sounds like in the waning hours of the day, you go down there, and if that back door is open, you're going to be able to tell because the light's going to be coming in. If you start to go down to that basement and it's like going down a ladder, I guess, go down that ladder and you look, if you could see that, like, yeah, the light's coming in, man, it's obviously closed. There's nothing to go down there and see. Nothing's on fucking fire. You would know. So during the daytime, you're not going to really check so much. But now during the night, because it's dark, you have to actually physically go down there, walk to the far end of the thing, take a look, make sure it's closed, nobody's broken in, and then you go back, go upstairs. So this guy gets down there at 3 in the morning finally. He's making his rounds. He gets back down to the basement at 3 in the morning. He's walking to that far end of the factory building in the basement, and he sees something there in the dark. He's not quite sure what it is, he says. He thought at first that some of the boys were playing a trick on him, that they had put something there, maybe got a wig, but then as he approaches, he sees that it's a white girl. And initially the police questioned them, and they're like, well, look, how the fuck could you see that this was a white girl? That you got like just this broke-ass little lantern, and you can't walk up on her, and she's dirty as fuck, so how could you tell that this was a white girl? And he goes, well, look at her hair. Look at her clothes. Black women don't have clothes or hair like that. Obviously, this is a white girl. And to me, that was kind of one of the things that's like, oh, that's kind of an indicator to me that like this guy didn't have to reach for it. It's like, yeah, obviously, dickhead, like you feel stupid. Like this illiterate night watchman is straightening you out. So anyway, he goes down there and he sees this, and immediately, based on what this guy Newt Lee testifies and based on the way that the cops talk about him, this guy's immediate reaction was like, holy shit, I am fucked. Because apparently, like, you just stumbled on some major fucking crime and nobody knows for sure that you didn't do it. You might be in bad fucking shape, friend. But this guy immediately guts it out, goes and calls the cops and says, holy shit, there's a dead white woman down here. Calls a police station, freaking the fuck out. They're like, okay. He calls them, the police get over there, they immediately roll this guy up. They're like, yeah, you say what you want, but you're getting rolled up, you're coming with us. And again, not so much necessarily that they were sure that he'd done it, but because anything like this, they're going to roll up anybody in the vicinity. So they roll him up. While the cops were on the way, Newt Lee had attempted, let me back up a second. Before he finds the body, about 7 o'clock in the evening, about an hour after Leo Frank departed the factory, he called back to the factory to ask if everything was okay. Newt Lee says this is something he had never done before, that he had never gone home and then called back to make sure everything was okay. So he says, yes, Mr. Frank, everything's fine. Okay, just checking. So that immediately to me looks fucking suspicious. But, maybe. He says that he wanted to make sure everything was okay because of that Gant fella in there trying to get his shoes, make sure he didn't start any trouble. You would imagine you would have heard about it, if the guy tried to set the place on fire, but whatever. So fast forward back to live action. So the cops roll him up. And apparently between the time that he called the cops and that the cops showed up, he called Mr. Frank as well. Only Mr. Frank didn't answer. It's like 3 a.m. He says that he didn't hear the phone ring. What fucking ever. But he tries to call Mr. Frank. He doesn't answer. So they roll him up. They take him away. They get the coroner down there. They get the girl removed out of the basement there. They get her sent to the medical examiner. And now the cops apparently managed to get a hold of Leo Frank, get him on the phone. They say, sir, there's been something happened down at the factory. We're going to need to, we'll come and talk to you about it. We'll tell you what happened. So they didn't tell him exactly what happened yet, but they show up to his house. And according to like five different officers testify that this guy comes to the door and he is sweating like a nun in a whorehouse. This guy comes to the door sweating, fidgety, and all of them said he's rubbing his hands. I thought that was, I mean, it is what it is, dude. I mean, like, you don't know at the time, but we know now, like, oh, obviously, you just put a big fucking sign on it, like, I done it. So he shows up, he's rubbing his hands, and he says, oh, what happened? What happened? And they said, yeah, sir, do you know Mary Fagan? And he's like, no, I don't know any Mary Fagan. They're like, yeah, works at your factory. He goes, oh, well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know anybody's names. It might be somebody like that. I'd have to check my books. They go, okay, well, why don't you go ahead and get dressed, and we're going to go over here and take a look at her. You see if you recognize her. So they're waiting for this guy to get dressed. They say that one of the cops on scene testified that the guy couldn't get his tie done properly, had to get his wife to help him with his tie, that he was super fidgety and nervous. One of the officers at one point said, and this part is understandable, like, hey, if you found out that like a murder just took place at where you work, you know, what if it was you, dude? What if you were the manager and somebody where you just left got murdered? And they're like, hey, we don't think you did it. We just want to see what you can offer. So if you could come with us. I could see a guy being a little shaken, but that's not why I'm telling you this. At one point, one of the officers says, sir, if you'd like a little liquor to calm your nerves, that might be a good idea. And his wife says, oh, no, we don't keep liquor in the house. But then his mother-in-law, who he lives with, so he lives, Leo Frank, with his mother and father-in-law. His mother-in-law says, no, his father-in-law drank all the liquor last night because he has indigestion. So first, I'm like, what who drinks whiskey to help with indigestion? Like that makes great fucking sense. But bear in mind, I'm not telling you this for nothing. Like this is the story that they ran with. That like, oh no, we had liquor, but his father-in-law drank it all. So they had already rounded up Mr. Darley, I guess, who works there as well. And they get in, and according to Mr. Darley, he was shaking the entire way, shaking and nervous the entire way to the medical examiner's office. So they get down there, they go in, and now there is all these cops, and there's Mr. Darley that works there as well, and they go to walk in there, but every single cop testified. One cop testified that the guy didn't even go in the room, that there's like a little side room that he thought might be a closet. It turns out it's where the medical examiner slept when he was, I don't know, having long days, or there's a lot of dead bodies. I don't fucking know. But there's a little side room right before you get into the examination room. And he says, as far as I saw, he just ducked in there. He didn't even walk inside. So nobody said, none of the police there, when asked, said that, yeah, I saw him look at the body. Like this fucking guy couldn't even go in there and look. Like didn't even walk in there and look. Now you can say that, like, yeah, this is just down to nerves. Maybe it freaked him the fuck out. But again, this is your fucking place, man. You're in charge of this place. Something just happened, presumably, where you work. I would want to know if, like, did somebody break in the back door and just leave a body here? None of these questions came up. This guy didn't even fucking look. So they go in there and they're kind of observing this guy now. And, you know, the thing about this, I think, and I mean, dude, I won't say that I'm a fan of cops or anything, but to look at this situation objectively, you know, whatever it is you do for work, man, if you drive a car, you drive a cab, you drive a truck, you put things in boxes, you work at a pizza place, there's going to be something that becomes second nature to you, whether that's running a cash register, whether that's folding pizza boxes, whether it's maybe by the feel of the car. You're like, dude, I got to get gas soon. There's going to be things that become second nature to you. Now, to me, if I think of this from a cop's perspective, where you're working, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and you're going day to day with people doing horrible shit, and you probably, you talk to 10 innocent dudes, and then you talk to one guilty motherfucker. After a while, I will imagine that you're going to start recognizing that difference, that it's going to become pretty apparent, pretty obvious. So sometime around this time, as Leo Frank is not looking at the murder victim here, they start getting the idea that maybe this motherfucker is involved in this. So they say, hey, why don't we go down to the station? We've got Newt Lee, your night watchman, down there, and we think he might know more than he's saying. So as to whether that is exactly why or exactly when they make that decision, that's, up in the air. But this is kind of where this goes. So they bring him down to the station. They go, he's not telling us anything else, and we think he might know more than he's saying. So what we'd like for you to do, because you're his boss, we'd like you to go in there and talk to him and tell him to start, being forthright with us. So he goes in there and he says, now, Newt, I know that, you're a good boy and, you do good work, and I'm your boss. So you need to do what I ask you to do. So I need you to tell these guys what you know about this. Otherwise, we'll both hang for this. That really caught my ear. This is what he fucking said. We'll both hang for this. So somewhere in this little Hebrew's mind, already the prospect that unless this story goes just so, he's going to be on the hook. It works its way into his consciousness. But that's not what this is all built around. So as this plays on, then they go on and they start interviewing different people. They go and they interviewed this guy, Jim Connolly, who was a sweeper at the place. And according to him, the first time they talked to him was like, no, I didn't see shit. I was just sweeping. There was a few people upstairs on the 4th floor. There was a few women that came and went. One woman, a Mrs. White, came to visit her husband for a minute while he was at work. Another woman, Corinthia Scott, I believe it was, came to talk to him for a minute. All of these people testified, like all of the normal people testified that, yeah, he did appear a little bit nervous. But they go ahead and arrest Connolly, even though he's, I ain't know nothing. But he seems to be kind of the guy. And from reading the guy's testimony, which I'll get into shortly, this guy seems to be like the clever fella that's just kind of all over the place. He's all over this fucking factory. So if anything's going on in this place, this guy knows something about it. But they go ahead and arrest him. And initially, he's talking about like, yeah, no, I didn't see shit. As they start getting more and more into what went on here, like the nature of the crime, they start looking at him a little bit more. So a little bit more about the nature of the crime. When they found Mary Fagan, her face was super, super dirty. What they concluded was that whether she had been dropped down the ladder to the basement or had taken the elevator down, that she had been drugged face first from off of the elevator to her final resting spot. Near the body, they found 2 different notes on little notepads that, according to a bunch of different people, were kind of all over the office. Like there's just all over this building, there's like notepads and pencils and then pieces of twine that go for tying up these pencils. And these were just things that got loose. Everybody testified that like, yeah, this is just kind of how it is here. But on these notes, there was 2 different notes found. One of them said, that tall, black, slim Negro fella did this. And the other note said, when I go make water, that tall, slim Negro, he do this me while he play me. So obviously you kind of get the takeaway that this is not written in the tongue of an educated person. But so they go once again to Jim Connolly. And this really is where the story starts to unravel a little bit. So according to Jim Connolly, I'm going to go over some of his testimony now and some of the things that corroborate with some of the other things that come out as this whole trial and all the interviews kind of proceeded. So according to Jim Connolly, the way that things went at this pencil factory was essentially that this guy, Leo Frank, was running this place like his own personal cat house, long and short. That there were a good number of girls who were being whored out, and the preponderance of them, he would just go by and have his way with, and that he had a habit of poking his head into the dressing room, and this is according to several witnesses, would just poke his head into the women's dressing room and like, hey, ladies, just seeing what you're doing, this kind of shit. All right. So the way that they were running this was that Leo Frank's office being upstairs and kind of directly over that little entry spot, when a girl would come in, there's a window there where he can kind of see out and see who's coming in through the front of the building. If it was a girl that he was expecting on Saturday, so Saturday then would turn out to be his fuck around day, he would stomp, like stomp on the ground, and Jim Conley, who would be stationed down there at these particular times, these particular days, would know then to go and lock the front door so nobody else could get in. And then whatever would go on up in Frank's office or back there in the machine area or down in the basement, he would do his thing. And then when he was done, they'd head back up through the office area. And at that point, Frank would whistle, and Conley would know to go and unlock the front door and make yourself scarce so the lady can leave with her, with her integrity intact, like nobody saw what you were doing. Nobody knows what you were up to in here. Apparently then, there was a guy named Dalton who did not work at the factory. This was a local, I think they said, I want to say blacksmith or machinist, one of these. And this guy Dalton then was apparently neck deep in this thing. And if you read through the court records, the way they wrote court records then was like they didn't write the attorney's question. It would just be the testimony of whoever was on the stand. So it would just talk, and you could kind of figure out where questions were fitting in because it would jump from like one thing to another. But all of the women that testified, they would testify about like, no, I didn't know him. No, I never saw him walk into this part of the building. No, I never saw him drinking a beer, walking down this hallway at exactly this time of day. Like, it was obvious that like they were not asking all of these women these specific questions because he wasn't there or because he was unknown to them. Like, this guy was obviously a known quantity. And we'll get to more details of that as we move along. But this guy, to some degree or other, was involved in this pimping game that was going on here. So this is the way that things ran there. The day before, again, Friday, Frank had asked Conley to show up a little bit early. I don't know what time he usually came, and I think he said like 9. But I do know that according to Mr. Darley, the guy that, didn't want to let that little girl keep $3 to bury her old man, Darley wanted all of the sweeping done before noon, presumably so this guy wouldn't be there just fucking around and hassling the other workers and what have you. So get your fucking sweeping done, get the fuck out of here, all right? But whatever time this guy was supposed to show up, Conley shows up a little bit early, and he's coming through the front door, and he sees Mr. Frank getting there at the same time. And he says, Jim Conley, this guy's name, right? He says, Jim, what are you doing here so early? And he says, well, sir, you asked me yesterday, show up early. He goes, well, yeah, I said early, but this is a little earlier than I expected. So Conley says, well, I was going to go downtown and see my mother at the washing, where she works as a washerwoman or some shit. So if whatever you need from me, can it work with that timeline? And he says, so according to Conley now, Frank's words to him are, well, what I wanted to put you wise for today, like we have before. So there's going to be a girl coming around today, and I want to do the same thing where you wait down here on the first floor by the door, and then when you see her show up, when you see her show up and you hear me stomp, then you go and you lock the front door, and then you hang out, and when I whistle, then you come and open the door and make yourself scarce. He says, okay. He says, but I have to go downtown. I have to meet Mr. Montauk downtown. So as soon as you're done meeting your mom at whatever it is, 10 or whatever, then come and meet me on the corner of whatever the fuck and whatever the fuck. And then we'll walk back here together, and, we'll make sure everything is good to go, and then we'll be on for this thing. Okay, no problem, sir. So this Leo Frank and Mr. Darley then, they go downtown to see this Mr. Montauk. The deal here is apparently to drop off some of the financial documents that they generate during the week and do whatever nerds do. But they go down there, and according to Frank, who testifies later, they left about 9:30. They went to see Mr. Montauk. He stopped at a soda fountain. On the way back, he meets, well, no, he didn't say Frank didn't admit to meeting Conley on the way back, but according to Conley, they met on the way back to the factory. So they're walking back to the factory now. He's reviewing with him. This is what I want you to do. This girl's going to show up. So they get back to the factory, and according to Conley, he sees the girl that works as a stenographer come out and take off. Testifies that he sees Mrs. White show up, who shows up and asks Leo Frank, can she come and see her husband in a little while? Then Mrs. White leaves. Then he sees who he describes as Mary Perkins show up, who is Mary Fagan, but he knows her as Mary Perkins. So he sees Mary Perkins show up. He testifies that he just sits there for a while. He doesn't see or hear anything else. And then he sees this girl, Montine Stover, show up, who he identifies and recognizes and describes what she wore. Says that she wore like some shorts and some sneakers of some kind. So he sees this girl, Montine Stover, show up. According to Montine Stover's testimony, she got there about 12:05 to his office. She says that she went inside. Leo Frank wasn't there. And she waited about 10 minutes. 12:15, she took off. This is the same thing that Conley says. He doesn't know what time it was, but he says, I saw Mary Perkins, right, Mary Fagan, if you will, show up. Then I saw that other girl in the sneakers, Montine Stover, show up. But then I saw Montine Stover depart, and the other girl didn't come out. At that time, the attorney asks how much longer he sat there after that until something else happens. He says he wasn't sure because he thinks maybe he fell asleep. This part seems extremely believable to me. In any case, shortly after that, he says that he hears a woman scream, and then he hears some feet moving around. And shortly after that, he hears a stomp, 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 stomp. So he thinks to himself, apparently, oh, maybe somebody showed up and walked upstairs that I didn't see. So he just goes over and locks the front door. So now the front door is locked, and he goes and sits back in his spot where he was sitting at the bottom of the stairs there. But then he hears the whistle. So he's like, okay, well, that was kind of quick. But now he goes and unlocks the front door and, as directed, walks upstairs. And at the top of the stairs, he says that he sees Mr. Frank sweaty and rubbing his hands and nervous. And he starts telling him about something happened with that girl. Something got out of hand, and I think I might have hurt her. I need your help. Conley at that point says that he walked again on the second floor, walked straight back through the double doors to the machine area, or to whatever the fuck they do back there area where those girls work, and says he sees her laid out back there, and says that he sees a piece of twine wrapped around her throat, sees some of her clothes around her throat, her tongue sticking out a little bit, and she's bleeding out part of her head. So he walks back to the front and he says, Mr. Frank, I think she's dead. And he says, well, you got to do something. So whatever the negotiation there is, like, yeah, I'll take care of you. I'll help you, guy. What ends up happening, again, according to Connolly, is that he goes back there. He grabs up a sheet from back there in that area, gets her scooped up, starts carrying her back towards the elevator. At one point drops her because he says I guess it came out to about 107 pounds. And, that's, 107 pounds of difficult to carry, right? But says he drops her at one point, gets her to the elevator. Frank helps him get her into the elevator. They get down to the first floor. And it was a little fuzzy here on exactly where the elevator goes to. It appears to go all the way to the basement, but there was some debate as to whether they just took her like right nearby to the ladder and dropped her down there, or if he took her all the way to the basement and then drug her out. It sounds like, from what the police describe seeing, it appears that they went all the way to the basement and then drug her to the final spot where she was. That was what Conley testified, was that they took the elevator all the way to the basement and drug her over there. So this elevator, mind you, this is not like elevator like you have now. Like, this was like an advanced piece of machinery. And in this instance, Conley specified that when he went back there and saw her, and as he's having trouble moving her, Mr. Frank ran back to his office and got the key to the elevator, because apparently you need a key to operate it. Got the key to the elevator, got it open, got him in there, and then they went all the way down, and this is, everything took its place from there. They went back. Fuck, dude, where did they write this note? There was some discussion. So initially, Conley gave his thing in 3 different pieces when he finally broke and started talking to police. So initially his story was like, I don't know nothing. I ain't did nothing. I don't know nothing. I ain't seen nobody. Later, when it started looking like he might get rolled into some of this, based on the notes that they found, his story was that when Mr. Frank called him up there, he said, "Hey boy, come up here." So he came up from the bottom of the stairs and he said, "Hey, come into my office." He says, "Hey, can you write?" And he says, "Yeah, a little." He says, "All right, write this down." And he tells him what to write. But that's all I know about it. And obviously this is fucking stupid, right? Like, this story is weak as shit. This is what he told police though, that yeah, he just asked me to write this, so I wrote it. Later then, he comes and he says, well, no, he told me that he was messing around with that girl and that, that she might have got hurt, but that, it could easily be mistaken for something the night watchman did. So here's what I want you to write this down. So they're like, okay, we already don't suspect the night watchman, but you want to try again. So they press him a little more, and now this guy folds like a fucking lawn chair. So he tells him this whole story, that the whole deal with the knocking and the whistling and Mr. Frank and the wringing of the hands and the rubbing and all this shit. So these notes are already written at this time, but he takes the notes presumably and the body, and they go down. It's Conley that he has dragged her back there and leave her there. As to when and how exactly those notes got placed there, I don't recall that Conley specified. He did say that he wrote them, but didn't specify exactly how that came to pass. So at this point, they go back to Frank's office, and Frank says, all right, they ask you something, just don't say anything, all right? And he says, well, wait a minute, I wrote those notes. They're going to know it was a black fella, and if, and as far as this guy knows, like fucking Newt Lee, like he's not really in the loop, it doesn't sound like. So at this point, he says that Frank takes out a bunch of money. Like he hands him a cigarette. He says, here, have a cigarette, relax. Hands him a bunch of money, and he says, all right, now you come back like later on tonight or tomorrow, and you get rid of that, right? We'll get it the fuck out of here. And he's like, yeah, but you did this. Like, well, what's going to happen if they catch me? And he goes, look, if they come after you, I have rich people in Brooklyn. I'm going to take care of you. And again, like, this is something that, like, this guy is a fucking sweeper, and according to him, makes like 11 cents an hour, I think it was, which is basically shit, right? Compared to a guy making $250 that runs the place. All right. So you can kind of see like these people, he has no business knowing about anything about this guy's personal life. Like, where's the boss from? He shouldn't know anything about that, but yet somehow he does. We'll come to that in due course. Anyway, so he says, look, man, I thought I could count on you. Look, we'll work this out. So he takes the $200 back from him, puts it in his drawer. But now he hears somebody coming up the stairs. So he says, get in the fucking closet. So he's got this big wardrobe in there, apparently. He says, get in the fucking wardrobe. Puts him in the wardrobe, closes his thing up. Now this girl, Corinthia Scott, who works in the office somewhere, she comes by, I don't know, to ask what? To ask fucking, I think, when materials are coming in or some kind of shit. Her and another person who we find out later is Corinthia Scott's daughter. So this woman and her daughter are there asking about, I don't know, materials or whatever. This guy, Conley, hears this. He hears these two women in his office. All right. So we know that, like, you could say any number of things are being made up, any number of things are being fabricated. But as we'll find out, like, there's certain things that you could not possibly fucking know, that you could not possibly lie about unless you knew that these things were happening as they went on, unless you were fucking there, right? So he finally gets them out of there. He lets Conley out of the wardrobe. He says, look, let's, I don't know, they do whatever they have to do the rest of the day. They just leave Mary Fagan down there. He finishes his paperwork. Well, essentially Conley's testimony from this point on is like he just kind of milled around for a minute, finished his sweeping presumably, and then he got the fuck out of there for the day. Frank's testimony at this point was that, well, everybody's testimony was that Frank went upstairs shortly after, told Mrs. White and her husband, who were working on the fourth floor, that, hey, I'm going to be closing the place at 3, so I need you to get the fuck out of here pretty quick. So he's shooing people out of this place pretty quick. Frank is there for the rest of the day, presumably finishing his fucking work that he didn't finish earlier while he was busy killing someone. Then he leaves about 6. About 6 p.m. is when he says he takes off. And that's according to, I think, Newt Lee as well, said the same thing, that he took off probably about 6. So before we get to Leo Frank's story, because really this is like the tale of two narratives, right? Because there's only really 2 people who could have pulled this fucking thing off, and it's these 2 clowns. But before we get to that, I think it's important to talk about kind of the essence of lying, if you will. So when you talk about lying, it's an unfavorable practice and people tend to look down on it. We think of it as telling anything that's not the truth. So when we talk about lying, though, you got to kind of break this down into two different versions. There's lies of omission and lies of commission. So when we talk about lies of omission, this is where you would talk about, hey, did you go to this part of town and rob this gas station? No. Okay, where were you? Not in that part of town. Okay, yeah, but where were you though? This is where it becomes different. Like, oh no, I've never been to that part of town. Okay, it is a lie, but you're not telling me something new. You're just saying you've never been to this part of town, never been to this gas station. This is the easy version. And this is the version of lies that you hear more from blacks. Hey, do you know this guy? Nope, don't know him, never saw him. You ever been to this part of town? Nope, never been there. You ever heard of this gas station? Nope, never heard of it. There's a lot of fucking lying that goes on throughout this thing. If you read it, this fucking trial and all these interviews, there's a lot of fucking lying. But as you read through it, it becomes very, very obvious that difference between the omission and commission. So initially when they talked to this guy, Jim Conley, like, hey, where were you? I don't know. I was drunk that day. Like, I think he told somebody, like one of the women had asked, like, I don't remember who it was, dude. One of the women that works there had come up to him and she testified to it in the documents that like, hey, Conley, they catch you yet? And he's like, no, I was drunk that day. I don't remember nothing. So it's easier to say like, no, I don't know anything. And that is what they say, right? I don't know nothing. What you see as this moves on though, is that for him to jump from I don't know nothing to being able to cook up this entire story, that's a very, very different skill set. All right. Now we're talking about lies of commission. And the difficulty there is that, if you come up with a lie, let me say it this way, dude. Like when I was learning to what they call develop a cover, like if you're going to say like, I don't know, you're going to fucking North Korea to, I don't know, install cameras in all the train stations. All right. If you're going to do that, you're not going to be able to walk through the front door and say like, what are you doing in North Korea? Are you a tourist? Well, I'm not in here to install cameras. That's for sure. Like, well, no, that doesn't fucking work. You got to have a cover. Like you got to have a believable fucking story. The trouble with that though is whatever story you make up, there are kind of certain nooks and crannies that have to align with the truth. Otherwise, this isn't going to be fucking believable. So when you see somebody, especially with a crime, that tries to make up a story like, hey, did you rob this liquor store? No, I didn't rob that liquor store. I was with my boy over here in this part of town. Okay, where in this part of town? At this McDonald's. Okay, well, let's talk to your boy. And suddenly that guy doesn't know shit about it. Suddenly that guy is like, oh, well, no, I was at work at that time. Well, let's take a look at your credit card statement. Oh, no, you don't see it. Well, who the fuck were you there with? Right? Okay, there's nothing on your credit card statement. Oh, well, my boy paid for me to go to McDonald's. Okay, well, where's his credit card statement? He said he's at work. Was it him or was it somebody else? Oh, maybe it's somebody else. This is where the stories start to get all fucked up, right? So when I look at this Conley situation, I see that like all of the holes line up perfect. And this really circles back, I mean, in spades, if you will, no pun, right? To that thing about, yeah, but I did have breakfast though. And we make that joke, but that, yeah, I did have breakfast though joke is in reference to something called aphantasia. So that's not like the name of the girl that works in customer service. Click, click, click. Sorry, I disconnected your ass. Right? Aphantasia is like the science-y name for the phenomenon of I am unable to conjure things in my mind's eye. So we know, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We know that this inability to imagine, right? To come up with a coherent image, this connects and correlates directly to IQ and other cognitive ability. So if we know that Connolly wrote those notes, right? And if we were to assume that Conley didn't do it at the direction of Frank, then we would have to also assume that he is incapable of coming up with a story this tight, because all of this stuff makes perfect sense. And when he testified to this, all of the reporters said this guy was air fucking tight. This guy did not waver. This guy did not stumble. This guy could not be tripped up. He testified for 3 fucking days. The defense attorneys got to where they were trading out on him. They were tag teaming on him because one of them would get tired and like, all right, man, you take over. And they would just keep hammering this guy for 3 fucking days. And this guy's story was air fucking tight about how he got from where he was to that body and how that body got down to where it was. So looking at some of the other details here, I mean, there is just a fuck ton of details. So moving on to Leo Frank's testimony here, I want to hit on this real quick. And dude, I read through this a couple times and listened to a book on it. So, I mean, I've got this thing pretty much down cold. But according to him, he got up at about 7:30 in the morning, had breakfast, got the streetcar, and showed up at the factory. When he showed up at the factory, he did not mention meeting Conley anywhere that morning. He said that he saw Mr. Darley and they talked about going to Montauk's to hand in these reports. And then he says that they left about 10:30 to go to Montauk's, talks about taking the streetcar, getting a soda, and then heading back to the factory. Again, did not mention Conley at all. He says that he got back to the factory. He details having spoken to Mrs. White about going up to the 4th floor to see her husband. He details discussion of some cutting that had gone on with some wood or some kind of shit. He details having seen Newt Lee that day. He talks about when he went home for lunch. He remembers the girl Hattie, I think it was Smith, came in and her situation with the $3. He details, the girl I couldn't remember. Suddenly he's got fucking amnesia. I can't remember who that one girl is that showed up. And she got her check and she just pissed off down the road. I don't know. I don't know. It's fuzzy. I don't remember what she had on. I don't remember shit, right? He doesn't remember any of that. But he remembers then all these other things with Newt Lee showing up and this guy Gant showing up and the conversation about the shoes. He remembers having gone home at a little after 1, about 1:10, he says, that he took off to go home. He remembers calling his friend, saying that, that baseball game we were going to go to, I'm not going to be able to make that today because there was a baseball game that George Epps, who saw Mary Fagan on the streetcar, had also mentioned too, that apparently there's going to be this Confederate parade and then later in the day there's a baseball game. So Leo Frank went home, called his friend, I'm not going to be able to make that baseball game. He went back to work. He remembers going up to tell Mr. and Mrs. White that, I'm going to be closing the place about 3, so you might want to get out of here. He remembers Newt Lee showing up early. He remembers sending him out. He remembers this guy Gant and his shoe situation. And then, I don't know, just nothing else. Nothing else really went on. And then I finished my work, I guess, and then I went home. But he remembers going home. And then that evening they went to play cards at some other Jew's house because that's what they do on these days. So he remembers all that shit. And then he remembers getting woke up in the morning. He remembers the cops showing up and he says that he was nervous and jumpy because he didn't have coffee. He didn't have breakfast or coffee. It's only fucking 7 a.m., guy. They were talking about 6, 7 in the morning when they showed up to get him, but it was 7:30 when you got up the day before. So how the fuck are you, you're nervous and jumpy before you get breakfast every single day? I don't fucking know. But according to him then, he doesn't know shit. He says that girl came in and she got her envelope, but apart from that, I didn't see anybody else. Now he says that he never left his desk during, about between noon and 1 o'clock or 1:10 or so when he went home for lunch. But then this other girl, Montine Stover, says, no, I was there. I didn't fucking see him. And his testimony was, well, it's possible that I could have, I had to answer nature's call. So what, your defense in this thing is I had to take a shit? That's your fucking alibi? Oh yeah, I was taking a shit. What could be more kosher than that, right? So he details then being taken to the police station and he says the same thing about, hey, you need to go and try to get Newt Lee to talk. And Newt Lee wasn't saying anything. And then they just decided to hang on to him for a while because obviously this guy is suspicious as fuck. And he says that the cops actually came to him again and they said, hey, we think it's pretty obvious that Conley has some degree of involvement and knowledge in this situation. We'd like it if you went and talked to him too. But at this point, instead of taking the opportunity to let me shift some suspicion off of myself and let me go talk to this fucking guy, because if I didn't do it, I'd be like, dude, all you want me to do on fucking handstand, I'll go talk to whoever the fuck you want. Anything that'll help clear my name because I had nothing to do with this, I'll fucking do it. I'd be all over that shit. All right. But instead he says, no, you guys tricked me into talking to Newt Lee. So I'm not going to go talk to anybody for you. I want my lawyer. So now the lawyer piece of this thing And that's really where it is, because that's where Leo Frank kind of stops cooperating. He presumes to cooperate, like, hey, stand here, go over there, be here at this time, get up in the morning, whatever, cooperates in that way. But as far as answering questions for the cops or any of this shit, like, that's the end of it, dude. The interesting thing here, though, is that, okay, like, rewind a little bit to when the cops first showed up to his house. And he's nervous as fuck because there's somebody dead in his factory, and holy fuck, I'm going to have to get to the bottom of this. And one of the cops says, hey, some liquor might help calm your nerves. And Leo Frank's mother-in-law says, oh, his father-in-law drank it all last night for his indigestion. Okay, obviously that's all fucked up. But this was the morning of Sunday, April 27th. So Sunday, April 27th, all this shit has happened, all right? And probably like the end of the 27th sometime. He's been in police custody for this whole time, and it's towards the end of the 27th. They decide, like, we're going to hang on to this fucking guy, see where this thing goes. By Monday, a private detective from the Pinkertons had already been secured on behalf of Leo Frank. High-dollar lawyers had already been secured on behalf of Leo Frank. So nobody had been secured in terms of like, hey, how can we get to the bottom of this? How can I fucking help? Pretty much as soon as this fucking guy set foot out the door, they were putting things in motion to get him off the hook. Circling back now to that comment of, we don't have any liquor, or Leo Frank's father-in-law drank it all. The maid at the Selig household, that's Leo Frank's in-laws, the maid there named Manola McKnight, she would give a sworn statement later in the presence of her attorney, a signed sworn statement, that when Leo Frank got home, he started fucking drinking. And he was crying that he had hurt somebody and telling his wife to go and get his pistol so he could kill himself. And she heard his wife, and again, this is like, it's kind of hearsay, I don't know, but heard his wife talking to his mother-in-law that he's going to be in a lot of trouble, and that he was drinking that night when they were at home, and that he made her sleep on the floor because he didn't want her in bed with him, which again, very Jewish sounding thing. But apparently that evening after Frank got home, they went to another Jew's house, allegedly to play cards. And the people there commented that, yeah, he made this weird, strange show of showing everybody a joke he saw in a magazine. And he was like really loud and laughing really loud about it. Then apparently when they got home is when all this drinking started, and this is what the maid was talking about. Referencing earlier in the day, that maid's husband, an Albert McKnight, who had been at the house, and I don't know, I guess as maybe a handyman type capacity, he testified that when Frank got home that afternoon, that he saw that he was in the kitchen. He said, I'd never been in their kitchen, but as the door swings open and closed, I could see him in there. He wasn't eating. He didn't come home and have lunch. So this guy was home from about 1:30 to probably about 3. During this time, he made a phone call, and as we will be led to believe, apparently wrote a letter. Because later, Frank's mother, Leo Frank's mother, Ray Frank, she would show up in court with a letter dated the 26th of April, addressed to Frank's uncle, Moses Frank, who owned the pencil factory. He actually owned it. Frank was just running the place. Leo Frank was just running the place. But she would show up with a letter. Like, look, he wrote a letter that day saying everything was fine. Why would he write a letter if everything wasn't fine? So at this point, I think it's important to take a closer look at exactly the kind of people that these are, because we can already kind of see that specific to this liquor situation, that like the wheels were already turning, like the cooperation was already happening, that like, we're going to get this fucker off. Like, we're not going to let this guy swing. So these women were already conspiring and like, oh yeah, there's no liquor, not because he drank it all last night while he was talking about killing himself for hurting somebody. No, it was his father-in-law. Somebody else drank it all. Okay, so specific to these Franks. So Leo Max Frank was born in 1884. You're going to want to hear this. This kind of plays. Born in 1884 in Briscoe, Texas. Okay, so now you might ask, like, wait, I thought this guy was from Brooklyn. He was from Brooklyn. 3 years earlier, his parents, the Franks, moved from Brooklyn to Briscoe, Texas. Why exactly? Who the fuck can say? They moved to Briscoe, Texas, and they were there for 2 years and change. But once Leo Frank was about 3 months old. So basically right after the good Mrs. Frank had given birth and coughed up this little gremlin, 3 months later, they moved back to Brooklyn. So now, mind you, this is in the 1880s. It ain't like you just hop on a fucking, even you hop on a train, dude, that's dicey travel. Now, when questioned later, she's talking about, or they're talking to Mrs. Frank here about, you know, does your family have wealthy relatives in Brooklyn? Because there's a point where Conley says, like, yeah, Mr. Frank, he said to me, like, oh no, we'll put this on Newt Lee. Like, I have wealthy people in Brooklyn. Why should I swing for this? And I'll take care of you. You just keep your mouth shut. So they're asking her, like, well, do you have wealthy people in Brooklyn? And she's like, well, no, my husband, maybe he has a few dollars he has, but he's not wealthy. And my brother, I guess it would be her brother, Moses Frank, is the guy that owns a fucking factory. I don't know how this didn't come up. But she also mentions that she has a relative of Mr. Stearns who's in the retail cigar business in New York. This set off fucking alarms for me, man. There is a book out there. It was recommended off of the rightstuff.biz. They were talking about this. It's called The American Jew, an expose of his career. This book's written in 1925. So this book's actually written over a decade after this murder took place. But it goes over a lot of the things that the Jewish community would pull in New York. So one of the things that they discussed at length in that book is the way that they kind of view gratuitous ugliness and vulgarity as a kind of a flex. Like, I could do this shit, you can't do anything about it. I could walk in here fat, sloppy, smelling bad, you can't do shit about it. It's kind of a flex to them. And we see that now as well. One of the other things they talked about was the phenomenon of Jewish lightning, which is essentially insurance fraud. And that, I mean, would it surprise you at all? Like, if that kind of thing had gone down in New York, and that was part of what prompted this Moses Frank to relocate to Atlanta and for Leo Frank's parents to relocate to Texas. But specific to this cigar thing, something you read about in that book as well, is this thing they would do where they would have cigar making factories in houses. So they'd buy a house and then they'd shove a whole shit ton of people in there. And they're like, all right, this is a cigar factory now. And they'd have everybody in there, women, kids, the whole deal, and running it a lot like this pencil factory where, like, you don't fucking go somewhere else. You fucking live here. And if you're awake, you're fucking working. And people are around all those chemicals for all these hours. And they would get sick. They would die. Like, these people were unpopular as fuck. And this is why. So when I saw Ray Frank, Leo Frank's mom, talking about, well, I have people in New York, someone in the cigar business, but I mean, that's not wealthy. What is that? I was like, oh, you dirty, dirty motherfuckers. So the appearance that I get from this is that when this guy got home from work, he did not fucking sit and have lunch or any of this shit. This guy sat down, told his wife and presumably his in-laws about what had happened, and the wheels started fucking turning. They got the news out to the Pinkertons. They secured those people and got those guys on site immediately because obviously Leo Frank wasn't fucking calling anybody. Like, that guy was hemmed up. Like, by fucking Sunday morning, he was rolled up. So who the fuck called these Pinkertons in, dude? Mr. Darley? Maybe. But the fix was fucking in because what happened was the way that suspicion got diverted from Newt Lee was actually because they found a bloody shirt at his property in a burn barrel in back of his property. So you might say, like, wait, no, that means you have more suspicion. Like, no. That was how he became not a suspect, because they found this fucking shirt. And the way that this girl died, the way Mary Fagan died, was that she had been punched a bunch of times with somebody's right hand. Well, wait, let me specify. Not necessarily punched. Had suffered blunt force trauma to the left side of her face. All right, so whether that means punched, whether that means elbowed, whether that means had her face slammed against the ground, you know, maybe as someone was on top of her. These are all possibilities, but this is something that happened. Then one of the pieces of twine that was on that floor that's used to wrap up the pencils as they come out of the whatever the fuck pencil machine was around her neck, and that was used to strangle her. So cause of death was strangulation. And when she died with, as you might suspect, and I don't mean to be grotesque, but like with her tongue sticking out, like sticking out a little bit, as you might expect with somebody getting strangled in that way. There was also a big gash on the back of her head that had bled. So what this suggested was that she had fallen in some way, had hit her head somehow, some kind of a way, had bled out of that a little bit, but shortly after was killed. So the blood stopped pumping. She also had all those other cuts on the front side of her body, and that presumably would be then from being dragged. This bloody shirt that was found at Newt Lee's house, it was bloody front and back. Like really sloppy craftsmanship here. Like they got this shirt that's just soaked in fucking blood. And they bring it to him and they're like, "This your shirt, boy?" And he's like, "Well, I don't think it is." But he says, like, and the guy says straight out, "Well, if you found it at my house, I'd assume it's my shirt." And he says, "But that shirt looks kind of new." And he says, "Look at it, because I don't have any store-bought shirts. That shirt looks store-bought. All my shirts are handmade." And in this case, handmade is not like it's super, like some fucking Italian shirt, that's tailor-made for you. It's like some rickety-ass shirt that somebody in the neighborhood made. And he says he only had 4 shirts, and all of his are handmade. That shirt is not handmade, it's store-bought, and it's brand new, and it's all fucking bloody. So, I mean, fucking sloppy, come on. As far as finding things around the factory in terms of the evidence, after the police had all gone through it, once again, one of the Pinkerton guys comes up with an envelope that says Mary Fagan on it, that's empty of money, but somehow says Mary Fagan, and has no money, and then a stick with some blood on it. So mind you, there's no DNA testing. But if you remember, Frank said that, like, "Oh, I can't know who that girl was because I don't know them by their names. I know them by their numbers in my ledger." So he didn't have Mary Fagan on any fucking envelope. And the medical examiner said, like, "No, this injury to the back of her head, this was caused by something sharp, like pointy metal type shit. This was not caused by a stick or a club or some shit." But looking further at the medical examiner's testimony, that kind of warrants a going over. This guy testified that she had been sexually assaulted, judging by the condition of her genitalia, judging by the tissue damage, judging by the traumatized state, judging by the presence of blood, that she had been sexually assaulted, her undergarments were torn, and as to whether she was or was not a virgin when she showed up to the factory, she definitely was not when she left the second floor of that pencil factory. So most likely, this girl had been violated in the manner described by Conley, with all of these shenanigans and this bullshit going on. So the doctor went on to say that the wound to the back of her head probably happened before death because it showed signs of bleeding, but it didn't fracture the skull. It just bled a lot. So what it sounds like happened was this guy got her back there and through those double doors in the machine area, tried to make his move. She didn't go with it. He maybe punched her, slapped her, hit her, whatever. She probably fell back, hit her head, maybe rolled over, tried to crawl away. I could see where you get on top of her, slam her head into the ground a couple times. Maybe she's unconscious. The guy tears her undergarments, maybe makes some penetration, whatever, in some kind of a way. But then figures out that, like, holy shit, dude, I think, I don't know, maybe she kept fighting and then he got something and wrapped it around her neck and just strangled her, because that was determined to be the cause of death. So the interesting part here is that, it might be easy to look at this and say that probably Connolly could have done this just as easily. So that's really the only other, I would say, viable theory, but it's not really a viable theory, and here's why. In order for Conley to see her go up the stairs, maybe he sees her go up there. Obviously, she went up there and let's say at some point she was in there getting her money. We can say that without a shadow of a doubt. Everyone says that. She did go up those stairs. But let's just suppose that she comes down the stairs. This guy Conley sees her, is like, "Hey, I'm going to do something I haven't probably ever done here before." Like knowing, right, that you get caught doing this, you will fucking swing, sir. Like you're fucking done. But he's going to go with it. He's going to do it anyway. So let's suppose then that he cracks her across the face, drags her into, I don't know, further into the first floor and or down to the basement, beats the shit out of her, strangles her, finds a note and scrawls like, "Dat tall, long Negro, he do this me," and just leaves that and takes off. While he's doing all of that shit, all right, he's only got, what has he got, like 5 minutes tops? He's got 5 minutes tops to get that fucking done, all right, to beat, rape, murder, strangle, write 2 notes, and then get back to his spot so that he can see this girl, Montine Stover, walk up the stairs. He has to be in place to see that because he testified. He knew who it was that came next. He knew what she was wearing. So there's no real question that this guy saw her. Like, nobody came later and said, like, "Hey, you didn't happen to see this girl in sneakers and come in shortly after." No, dude. He says that he saw it. And if somebody had tried to tell him, like, say it like this, "Don't fuck this up," he would fuck it up. And he would certainly fuck it up over the course of 3 days of cross-examination. So we know that the guy was fucking there. Could he have piecemealed this thing where he goes back there, maybe, I don't know. I don't know how you actually pull this off. Maybe beats her, smacks her around, murders her on the first floor, and then leaves her, goes back and sits for a while so that he could see somebody come in, I guess, see what people they do, and then run back there and then drag her down to the basement. That seems fucking weird to me. I don't see how that works. Like, if you know that you need to be there to watch somebody show up, then maybe. But if you're in the middle of this, like, "I've got this body to hide, but I need to go and get an alibi, so I'll be right back." No, that doesn't really work for me. Further, unless he's upstairs later in Frank's office, there's not a way for him to know. There's not a way for him to know the Corinthia Smith and daughter that show up later. There's not a way for him to know things like Mrs. White going upstairs later. All of these things that he seems to know, he couldn't possibly know unless he was in these locations. So long and short, it was Connolly's testimony that really sank this Leo Frank. Further along, though, I mean, there was a laundry list of other people that pretty much put the nail in the coffin on this clown. So there was this Manola McKnight, again, the maid, who testified that she saw him get back at lunchtime and he was kind of a mess. And then later that night, it was his wife and mother-in-law talking about, you know, he's in bad shape, he's boozing, all this kind of shit. There was all of the police that testified, like, they went over this place with a fine-tooth comb, and some of the planted evidence, like the bloody stick and the envelope and the bloody shirt. And then there was no shortage of Jewish witnesses from around town that swore that it became so peculiar. They're like, "Oh, no, I saw Mary Fagan with this fella. Oh, no, I saw Leo Frank at such and such time." And they're like, "Hey, ixnay on the Ankh fray." Like that, those timelines don't match up. Those holes in the story don't match up, right? But you see these names with these Cohens, these Schiffs, these Levis, these Strausses, all of this shit. And they're like, "Yeah, your story is like, you're making it fucking worse, guy." There was a machinist as well as some of the detectives that looked at it, but this machinist that, I mean, these people are there every fucking day except Sunday, right? And he says that he saw some blood spots outside moving through that machining area, some blood spots on the floor near the women's dressing room. And there was the argument that, like, yeah, once in a while somebody hurts themselves on one of the machine, they bleed, they got to get patched up. It's not a big deal. But he says, yeah, but this shit wasn't here before. And then there was some white shit that somebody had apparently tried to dump onto it and scrub it away. And he says, yeah, this shit wasn't like this before. And then they called one of the other cleaning guys. They're like, yeah, this wasn't like this before. This wasn't like this on Friday. I go through here every fucking day. And this wasn't like this. This wasn't here. So for this all to work, this means that, like, I mean, this guy Conley, then presumably this appears to have happened, like, without question, on the second floor. So he would have had to see her go upstairs, somehow connect with her between getting to the first floor and the second floor, get her back to the second floor, kill her, get her back downstairs to the basement, write these notes, get back upstairs, get this scrubbing shit, try to scrub away these blood spots, and then be back downstairs all in time to see all of these other comings and goings. That story is shit. That doesn't fucking work at all. What is Leo Frank's alibi? I was taking a shit. That's his only fucking alibi. I saw her when she left here and I never saw her again. And then some other girl says she shows up, but I think I was taking a shit, so I didn't see her. That's all I have. That's all I got. Like, that is a weak fucking story. But as this trial went on then, and I'm coming to the end of this here pretty quick. As this trial went on then, there was they interviewed a whole list of people that both worked there, like both current and former employees. And what you noticed was, like, the defense called all these girls that worked there, and every single one of them said, no, Leo Frank's a paragon of decency. I've never seen or heard of him doing anything. Like, no, I've never been tricked out in the basement. No, this is all bullshit and made up. And at the other end of the spectrum is people who used to work there. And in this case, every single woman, every single one, over a dozen that's just listed in the court transcript, all of them testified that, like, yeah, this is a lascivious motherfucker. Like, this guy is all over you. Did he know Mary Fagan? Fuck yeah, he knew her. I saw him talking to her all the time. One woman testified that she saw him talking to her, saying that, like, hey, you have to talk to me. I'm your supervisor. And she's saying, look, I have to get back to my work. So this guy was fucking on her, like jockeying fucking hard. So, you know, if he had said, like, yeah, I know her, I've talked to her, like, you know, what, even if he said, like, yeah, I flirted with her a little bit, that would have been something. And this, I think, brings up the idea of like kind of the negotiation principle of, like, cutting your losses. And what I mean by that is that you ever see, like, on Pawn Stars, right? Somebody walks in with, like, a baseball card and they say, what do you got there? I got this sweet baseball card. How much you want for it? I want $700. So they walk in there, and even, like, it says on the screen, man, guy's got, like, fucking Joe Blow baseball card, whatever, $700, and it says right there on the bottom of the screen. As soon as the guy is like, I can't do 700, I could do like 500. Now you see that it's like, there's a big X through that 700, because now the option has shifted from, like, I'm going to walk in here and get 700. Now your only option is I can walk in here and get 500, or I can walk out of here with nothing. Like, you still have the value of the card, but you can't spend that, right? So it's either, now it's 500 or nothing, because this guy doesn't see this thing the way you do. That kind of principle, like, you see this principle in negotiation. You talk about this, like, when you try to hire somebody for a job, or if there's, like, a job that you were going to pay somebody a certain rate, but now something has happened and now the situation has changed. Like, whenever the situation changes, instead of saying, you know, like, the negotiation tool is that you don't say, like, look, I have to give you less. You present it as, I can give you less. So in this case, like this baseball card, 500, I can give you less or zero. Do you want less or zero? So the 700 thing is, like, off the table now. Like, your initial expectation is off the table. You're going to have to take something else. It could be less or zero or fuck all, right? This really applies here because, you know, you look at this situation, it's pretty fucking obvious that this guy was pimping girls out, that this guy was having his way with the help, right? So where the expectation you walked in here with might have been, I'm going to get off scot-free. The big X is through that. Now here's Rick standing there like, best I could do is sledgehammer in your nuts. All right. So you could either get your nuts sledgehammered and cop to, like, yeah, I got handsy. You know, I might have, you know, they were into it too, though. I might have had my way with a couple of them. Yeah, I let a few people in here to do some unsavory shit. Yeah, you know, that was bad judgment on my part. But I didn't kill him. All right. Because right now, that's what's on the table, guy, is you swinging for murder. All right. So you had scot-free out there as an expectation, but now Rick gives that the axe. And now what you can get is, at the worst possible outcome, you get done for murder, but can you negotiate something better? Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was a little handsy. I got a little busy, but I didn't fucking murder nobody. If that was the case, this would have been the time to wheel that out. All right. This would have been the time to say, like, okay. You know, I did a little something. I knew that Conley did a little something. I did all kinds of unsavory shit, but I didn't strangle nobody. Because what is the fucking story here that like she was in the middle of getting strangled and then like, wait, stop, I'm going to write a quick note before I die. This is fucking stupid, right? I mean, that kind of just demonstrates stupidity anyway. And like one of the police said at the trial, this would be, to his knowledge, the first time he has ever observed a Negro using a written note to try to escape a murder charge. I'm inclined to believe that. So in any case, pretty much everybody has decided that like this guy, Garen fucking T did it. All of these women that got up there describing his character as bad for lasciviousness. Well, so to wrap it up, to kind of put a bow on this whole situation, this whole beating around the bush, let me kind of present what I think went on here. What appears to have happened was that Saturday was Leo Frank's fuck around day. This is the day I get to knock out a couple reports, and then I fool around with some of the girls, and then I go home. He asked if Connolly would come around a little bit early so that he could link up with this girl. This girl that came in, Helen Ferguson, asking for Mary Fagan's check. I think he specifically told her no so that she would have to come back on Saturday and he could start trying to work his magic. I think he had everything all set up, and I think that maybe she took him by surprise when she came through the door and he didn't stomp in time for Connolly to hear. I think he got her back there to the machining area, and this subject of materials coming in, because Mary Fagan had been laid off, and the subject of whether or not materials had come in for her to resume work came up at a few different points during a lot of the questioning. So I think maybe that was part of the premise to get her back there of like, did stuff come in? I don't know. Why don't we go back there and take a look? And got her back there, tried to do his thing. Didn't work out. He got violent. She got strangled, and then went back there. He was flustered, so he stomped. Connolly didn't come up. And then he remembered, no, I don't need to stomp. I need to whistle to get him up here. So he whistles. The guy comes upstairs. He says, holy shit, that girl's dead back there. I need help. He goes back there. He wraps her up in a blanket. He's carrying her, drops her, as he claims to have, right in front of the women's dressing room. She splatters a little blood. Leo Frank goes to clean it up. Leo Frank runs and gets keys to the elevator. They get in the elevator. They go down. They get her into the basement. Connolly drags her to the place where she was found. And then whether or not Frank went down later and dropped both of those notes. You know what? I was thinking maybe one of them left a note, and then maybe Frank went down there later and just threw another one down there. And there ended up being two, like a couple of dumbasses. And then he went back upstairs, and when he went home at lunch, I think that's when the phone call started. They're like, hey, I fucked up. We got to do something. And that is probably when the call went out to these Pinkerton guys, because they were Johnny on the fucking spot by Monday morning. And pretty much it was all hands on deck to cover this motherfucker's name. This guy was he was the president of his B'nai B'rith chapter, over 500 members. It was apparently a men's club. I don't know if it still is. I don't know anything about that, but this guy he was a big wheel. He was a big man, and he's a well-paid man. So it was all hands on deck to protect this motherfucker. So he got found guilty, and where he could have been sentenced to life in prison, the judge, a Judge Roan, I believe his name is, sentenced him without question, like, no, motherfucker, you are going to hang. And made it very clear. I couldn't find the quote again, but he said something to the effect of like, I am absolutely sentencing you to hang. There's no question in my mind that you did this, and I hope it can bring some kind of peace to the family, you know. So he got sentenced to hang, and this was in August of 1913. So it was only a few months. They got this thing wrapped up pretty quick. Pretty much immediately, though, Frank's attorneys started making noise and citing, incorrect procedures and so on, and wanting an appeal. They sent it first to the state. I don't know what the difference exactly in all these court levels is, but to the state level, and said, hey, we think this guy deserves a new trial. They looked at it and said, no, dude, there's no grounds for that we see here. They took it after that to the Georgia Supreme Court and said, hey, my boy got done wrong. He deserves a new trial. This, and that evidence should be thrown out. They said, no, dude, you should have brought this shit up at the time. He didn't get done wrong. We don't see any grounds for that. Piss off. They took it to the federal level. At the federal level, they didn't exactly take it up, as it were. They didn't offer a written opinion, but as I can understand and read it, which is not very well at all, they did look at it long enough to look at it and say, yeah, you ain't got shit here, get fucked. So they sent it back out the door as well. So with those options exhausted, they started looking at appeals for clemency. Like, please don't hang my boy, right? So by April 22nd, 1915, an application for commuting Leo Frank's death sentence had made its way to the desk of Georgia Governor John Slayton. Now, I wanted to be specific about that because by April 22nd, 1915, it had not even been 2 years since this girl, this 13-year-old girl, got raped, strangled, murdered, left for dead in the basement of a fucking factory. Less than 2 years. And these snakes have gone through state, Supreme Court, federal appeals processes, and now they're asking for a free pass, asking for some kind of a hookup to the governor. Not even 2 years. Show me anywhere else in the world where things happen that fucking fast. And this is in 1915. If this is the kind of power they're swinging in 1915, what do you think they can do now? This guy then, this governor, John Slayton, this guy was a former lawyer and he was a former partner at the law firm that represented Leo Frank. So as his last act in office, he signed this commutation, had his sentence commuted to life in prison. So immediately they send this guy to a prison about 150 miles away from Marietta, Georgia, where Mary Fagan was from. They get this guy the hell out of Dodge. As soon as he gets to this next prison, like this motherfucker was unpopular. As soon as he got to prison, somebody shanked him. Somebody tried to stab him to death. He got patched up from that, and by August, a lynch mob had been formed, and the prior governor looked at it and said, yeah, man, this guy deserves lynching. So if you fuckers go and get him, I don't think anyone's going to complain. So a crack squad, a crack lynch mob got put together, and they had dudes, reading about it, it's kind of money, dude. It's like a dirty dozen, except good guys this time. So they got in there, they got this guy out of prison. They drove him in the middle of the night, and they're driving like old ass cars, dude. So the math says that they are averaging like 18 miles an hour. So they roll this guy up, they get him out of there, they get almost all the way back to Marietta, Georgia. They stop and string this guy up. And by the next morning, people were coming out there to take pictures, see the sights, and it appears that there was some question as to whether they should even leave the body intact to be sent back to his family. Apparently, they decided to go ahead and leave it intact, so they left the guy's body intact. The coroner came and rounded him up, and there's a monument there today. It's at Roswell Road and Frays Gin Road, 2 miles east of the Marietta Square. This is the case that the ADL is founded on. This is what made them decide. They're like, oh no, we got to do something about this. Because even in, listening or reading through and listening to some of the transcript of the closing argument for the defense in this case, that was what it all boiled down to. That was their only real defense. Not that somebody else did it. Not that this guy obviously didn't do it. It was that he's a rich Jew. He makes a lot of money. You just don't like him because he's Jewish, because anti-Semitism in 1915, dude. I'm sorry, 1913 is when this went on. 1913, and you're already wheeling that out. So they decided to stand up the ADL. They got this monument out there. But as to whether or not this guy did it exactly as they said, I'm going to go with the leftist take of believe all women. Because his wife, once she died, she elected not to be buried next to him in a vacant plot. She elected to be buried in the Selig family plot next to her parents and pretty much washed her hands of the whole thing. So if anything spells it out pretty clear, I think that does. So there you go, man. You are up to speed on the Leo Frank thing. And just to me, the fact that these people are willing to overlook the rape and murder of a 13-year-old white girl to push their racial agenda tells me everything that we need to know about how we need to be viewing them in our dealings with them. So that's about as much as I can stand, and I'm pretty sure you've had your fill as well. So till next time, man, you know where to find all this horrible material. But until Until we meet again, keep your eyes on the horizon, keep your neck out of the noose. I have been Coffee. These are my takes.